Welcome to the EchoCast, episode 91. The EchoCast is a podcast about the Division franchise, the Division 2, news, updates, speculation, as well as basically anything else related to gaming or whatever I feel like talking about. I am Bon Diesel. I sometimes stream, I podcast, I shitpost on Twitter and Reddit, and I say things whether they help or not. I appreciate you listening. If you're a first-time listener, welcome. If you're back for more, bless ya. Today we're going to talk about Division 2 weekly news, some new Xbox Scarlet details, the Game Awards, Division 2 community topics, listener questions, and content updates. If you'd like to support this podcast and my other content, please check out patreon.com/theechocast. Thank you to our Patreon supporters this month: Hassan, Christian, Darren, Justin, Joe, Tim, PK, and DJ. I do want to congratulate Punk L for winning the Tommy Teddy Bear giveaway. I will try to ship that out as soon as possible, but I am notoriously bad about sending out prizes, and this is a very busy time of the year for me, so please be patient. For Division 2 news recap, so there's no state of the game. There's not going to be one until January 8th, as they said last week. So as for news between the 5th of December and the 11th, as far as I can tell, there is none. And I understand not doing the state of the games every week. I get it. I know this week, I believe a lot of the breaks began for the workers at Massive and different Ubisoft studios. But when they talked about not doing state of the games anymore, they did talk about trying to get information out a different way. And they were doing these news recaps on the forums whenever they didn't have enough time or enough new information for a state of the game. And we didn't get that this week. There's probably just not much to talk about, which is fine, but kind of can't have it both ways. I assume episode 3 is coming at the end of probably January or probably sometime during February, and I just don't. It really blows my mind that we maybe today, in lieu of an information drop, we would have gotten like a 15-second teaser for episode 3 or something. I'm not an expert. I don't work for Massive. I don't work for Ubisoft. I don't know what's going on. I'm sure, just like always, there's some grand plan. But I am a consumer. I am relatively involved in this community and have a decent touch on the heartbeat of what's going on. And this whole strategy for year 1 of Division 2 of holding all information about what's coming close to the chest and then just kind of blurting it out there a couple weeks before we see it. I don't think it's worked very well so far. Maybe I'm the only one who thinks that. I highly doubt that I am. But they have a plan and we're just watching it. So that's all I have for Division 2 this week. I have nothing else I can talk about. But we'll talk a little bit more down in the community topics. For other gaming news, we had the Game Awards last week. And the biggest reveal of that, I think, is pretty easy to identify. It was the reveal of the Xbox Series X. Or what I guess is going to be called the Xbox. We'll talk about that. One of the bigger things that came of it was that they announced Hellblade 2, Senua's Sacrifice, Hellblade, and the first game was made by Ninja Theory, and I actually just finished it. I'm going to talk about that later. But they announced a next gen game. That's a big deal. That's going to be on the Xbox Series X, the next generation. Is it going to be playable on the Xbox One generation as well? You know, maybe. I think I'll talk about that in a moment. But they've had a bunch more details drop about the Xbox since the Game Awards. So we do know it can stand up or sit on its side. The big thing about the Xbox Series X that we found out is that they have decided to go with a whole new form factor. So, man, even basically since like the Super Nintendo, you know, going way back, we've essentially had a rectangular long block with the PlayStations, with the Xboxes, even the Wii kind of all had a similar form factor. But the new Xbox, at least this one, is going to essentially be a cube, a tall cube, which is going to be very different. Now, I know a lot of people have talked about that. Oh, it's not going to fit my entertainment center and blah, blah, blah. Well, there's two things. On its side, it probably will. I think a lot of people saw pictures of it and assume this thing is going to be huge. But if you look at the pictures compared to the controller, which I imagine, well, actually an article I saw said specifically the new controller for the Xbox, the new gen, is actually a little bit smaller than the existing Xbox One controller. If you compare it to the controller, the new console actually looks really small, especially for how powerful it's going to be. So I highly suspect that for most people, it's not going to be that big of a deal. The second thing about the form factor is that I bet they don't want you to be able to fit it inside of your entertainment center. I have every reason to believe that they want you to display this thing on top of your, on top of a shelf or on top of your entertainment center, front and center, where everyone can see it. I think it's very intentional that they're going to make it a noticeable part of your setup, but also it looks very simple and classy and modern. I think it looks awesome. So, you know, from what I've seen so far, it looks like it's only about as wide on the four sides as a controller, which is not very big. It's maybe 7 inches, maybe 6 inches, I think. And it only looks as tall, I believe they've said it's only as tall as like the current Xbox One X when it stood up, which isn't very tall. So when you consider that it's got a fairly small footprint and it's not really that tall, you're talking about a pretty compact little device. They have confirmed that it's going to be able to play any game that currently plays, or on the day of the Series X release, any game you can play on Xbox One will be playable on the Series X. And that's a big deal. One of the biggest problems with the generational jumps is that there's almost never many good games, or hardly any games at all, that are available when there's a new generation of console. And there, you know, if there's no backwards compatibility, it's even worse. So what's interesting here is they're making it very clear. So what I've been saying for a while is I actually think that this Series X and all of the new Xboxes are really just super beefed out Xbox Ones when it comes to like an architecture. So a big question I have that I've been trying to get answers for and haven't found any is whether or not Xbox One games are actually going to be natively played on the Series X, and I think they will be. The architecture of the CPU of the Xbox One is going to be the same as the Series X. It's x86. So if you're a PC person, that should mean something to you. It might mean more to you than it does to me. But what I know is that means that if it works on one, it should work on the other. And what's actually interesting is that the first Xbox was actually x86. It was essentially a little PC. But then when they went to the 360, they used the PowerPC architecture, which was not the same as like a regular PC, which meant that that's why you actually have to use an emulator on the Xbox One to play 360 games, because it's not compatible. So it has to use an extra step to play those games. So because it seems like the Xbox One to Series X transition is essentially just going to be a huge graphics and hardware boost, but when it comes to the actual CPU and structure, especially because it looks like it's going to be the Zen 2 AMD GPU and CPU, it's essentially just a big power upgrade. It seems to be similar to the switch from Xbox One to the One X, which, you know, for me, you know, I've said it before, but, you know, months ago I said, man, I wonder, you know, if Division 2, you know, obviously that's a game that matters to me, if I'm going to be able to play that day one on the Series X. And it seems like I will be able to. And if it plays natively, then hopefully we get a patch for the Series X that allows us to have 120 FPS. It already has 4K on the One X for Division 2, but it's like way dialed down 4K. So if it allows them to actually open up a bunch of the really cool effects that you'd be able to get on a PC of the same power as the Series X is going to be, I mean, I think that's a big deal. And that's obviously not just for Division 2, that's for all of these games. Obviously first party games are going to get supported really well on the Series X, the Halos and, you know, any, you know, Hellblade and all that. But the third party is where it gets kind of interesting, because, you know, Ubisoft and Massive with Division 2 isn't just developing for the Xbox, they're developing for PC primarily, it seems, as well as the PS4, PS5 as well. And I don't even know how that's all going to work, with if they're going to be directly compatible natively, or if it's going to be emulated. So we'll have to see. I'm definitely curious. They have confirmed that they're going to call it the Xbox. It seems like they're going to try to go with kind of like an Apple type branding, where, you know, like most people don't say like I have an Xbox, or I have a iPhone XR12, you know, they say I have an iPhone. And maybe some people, you know, flaunt which one they have or not, but for the most part, you know, people know the iPhone as the iPhone. And it seems like Microsoft is trying to do the same thing with the Xbox. Whether you have a One X or a Series X or a Series S or any other versions they may come out with, you know, someone says, hey, you know, what do you game on? You say, oh, I game on, I have an Xbox. Oh, like which one? And then you know, you maybe clarify, but you can definitely tell from like a marketing perspective, they're trying to do that. Now, when it comes to consumer education and things like that, I worked at GameStop all through college and a little bit afterwards, and I will tell you that I feel bad for every single Xbox or every single GameStop employee and every single old person or even young person that comes in and wants a new Xbox. I'm curious to how they're going to try to get people to recognize each one. They did talk about the new controller. I mentioned it a little bit before. It's going to have some more direct like sharing capability. I think it's similar to what, you know, like the PlayStation 4 actually had, and some upgraded ergonomic stuff. So it's going to have a new D-pad on the base controllers, which is actually going to mimic the D-pad you can get on the Elite controllers currently. And they're also going to have haptic feedback on the triggers. So it kind of seems like they're going to be able to either have like vibration on the triggers, like to maybe help you feel like recoil and things like that. But it seems like they may even be able to like help you differentiate, like if you're playing a game like Hellblade and you make contact, you know, you swing your sword and use a trigger button to do that, and you hit the body of your opponent, it'll have a different feel than if they block you with their sword. You know, from like a shooting game perspective, this could depend on, like, you know, the caliber of your gun could, you know, vibrate more or less. Like shooting a bow and arrow, that could be kind of cool, because it could, you know, it could get harder to pull back as you pull the trigger more. So if you just kind of tap it, it'll be fairly easy. But if you try to draw it all the way back, you would feel some resistance. I'm really curious to how they can do that. It also could just be a complete, you know, marketing thing. And probably the biggest news, or the biggest things I've seen confirmed so far, is that they're going to have an NVMe SSD. If you're a PC person, you know what that is. I'm not super duper into that stuff, even though I kind of am. But basically, having an NVMe SSD in your PC is the fastest memory you can have in a computer. And when I say memory, I mean like storage space. So if you have a video game installed on a NVMe SSD on your computer, you're gonna get extremely fast loading times, especially if your PC is fast, if it's well built, has a lot of RAM, has a good CPU, has a good GPU. What they also talked about is that it's going to have DDR6 RAM as its primary operating RAM. And what's interesting about that is that for most PCs nowadays, even good ones, most people are running DDR4 RAM, which isn't old. I mean, it's not new, but it's really good. It's top of the line still at this point. And DDR6 is mostly only used in GPUs. So I don't really know. I know with other generations of consoles, it's had this thing where the CPU and the GPU kind of share RAM. I believe they've said that the Series X is going to have 12 gigabytes of dedicated like system RAM, with 4 gigabytes dedicated to like the operating system and stuff like that. And actually, this NVMe SSD can actually be used as like virtual RAM. So I'm really curious to how they're going to balance all that stuff out. So yeah, tons of Xbox details. When it came to the actual Game Awards, I thought it was really cool. I feel like it peaked early with the Xbox announcement, but there's some other cool stuff. Game of the Year got awarded to Sekiro. That's a game that I've heard a lot about. A game that I will probably never play. It's kind of a Souls type of game. I already figure I don't really like Dark Souls and stuff. It's not a type of game I enjoy. I even didn't care for the super easy version of it. That is the new Star Wars game. And so Sekiro, I can tell, probably just not my jam, but I've heard enough about it from enough people I respect to say that it's kind of a surprising Game of the Year, to beat out like Death Stranding, and to beat out even like Resident Evil 2's remake and things like that. But cool, I like seeing an underdog win, and it seems like it deserves it. On Twitter, I did a bunch of guesses on who. I actually did two things. I guessed what I thought would win each category, or each category I cared to answer, and then what I thought should win each category. And oddly enough, I did not do very well. I got 5 of my own personal favorites correct for games that actually won, and I got 5 of the picks that I thought would win, even if I didn't personally like it. I was a big fan of games like the Outer Worlds and stuff like that, which was like the Outer Worlds was nominated for a bunch of awards but didn't win any of them. I kind of get it. I think it's a bummer that they, apparently they're putting out DLC next year, which I'll definitely check out. But the Outer Worlds was one of my favorite games to finish in the last year, and really in the last few years. But it needed more. It was just, it needed like another like 5 or 6 hours of really interesting content. So I get why it didn't win the awards, but I'm really glad it got nominated. The second little gaming topic I wanted to talk about was an article I found on gamesindustry.biz, and it was called "Breaking the Outrage Cycle." The article talked about how the simple structure of quote-unquote live games at their heart kind of brings a conflict, as consumers pay for unfinished products and developers are handed technically impossible games to really finish. From my perspective, it seems that games like Destiny, The Division, Warframe, Anthem essentially promise more than they could ever really deliver when it comes to like modern day development cycles for most developers, which is 3 to 4 years, it seems, at this point. So it means that basically consumers can't be satisfied, even the most realistic ones sometimes. It also means that developers get pushed to their limits or beyond, and themselves can become resentful of the unsatisfied customer complaints about the work that they're slaving over. And sometimes I've even found that a lot of times the devs agree with a lot of the criticisms, but feel like the players just don't really understand that many of the requests that the consumers are making just aren't possible, either technologically or time-wise or budget-wise. this live game genre, especially because it seems like it's mostly looter shooters. It requires developers to be extremely transparent about what's, the upcoming content and updates to satisfy unsatisfiable customers. But this kind of also works against them because it makes storytelling and hype hard to do and to foster. To me, I think this leads to developers of live games walking a nearly impossible to walk line of ensuring things are coming to customers without spoiling those things and trying to make them high quality all at once. The article talked a lot about the kind of the perverse relationship where developers can put these games out and make a ton of money for a long time, even with relatively small audiences. But that relationship and that situation can create and spread toxicity and nastiness that honestly some people just seem to enjoy being a part of. It seems like even games journalists are involved in this kind of perverse relationship where this game promises a lot, it doesn't deliver, the community gets outraged, and then journalists now have easy stories to write, focusing on consumer toxicity and clapbacks from devs that are frustrated with clickbait articles. And it's to the point where the entire live game world, to outsiders, almost looks like this sustaining outrage cycle that just goes round and round and round. And even if the outrage is only coming from a relatively small number of people, something I've noticed about, most of my experience comes from the Division, but like the Division 2 is the type of game that I understand if people feel let down or if they haven't been satisfied with how the release has gone and how the game has gone since release. That's understandable, and if people want to express that and give their ideas or just express their frustrations, I think that's great. But the problem is that that's not really what I see much of. I mostly see people being just really toxic and really awful. I know people keep trying to argue the definition of toxicity. Honestly, if we need to argue about what that is, to me it's fairly easy just to know what it is when you see it. I can go into a much longer discussion about the specifics of it, but I don't really need to. It seems like a lot of people that push back on the toxicity talk are people who kind of like some of it and kind of either feel bad or they like the people who kind of scratch that itch for them, and that's fine. Teach their own. But like today, Hamish, who's a community manager for the Division 2, posted what I believe was a YouTube comment that was talking about him, and it had nothing to do with the game. It was just this long tirade of personal attacks on him. Hamish's only job is to take the information that he's given permission by Massive to release and then to present it to us on State of the Game. He doesn't develop the game. He doesn't decide what he gets to tell us. He has very little power when it comes to those things. His job is to disseminate the information in a friendly and entertaining way, which I personally think he does a great job of. And it's this type of personal, and I quote tweeted it and I pointed out that that's his job. And to a point, it's sad, but he has to kind of expect that behavior. But in my tweet, I pointed out that, I work a full-time job. I have a wife, I have a baby now, I have a family, I have friends, I have other activities I do other than posting on Twitter and streaming and doing YouTube videos and this podcast. And some of the things that I've experienced, I can't even imagine what it must be like for community managers or full-time content creators and stuff. I mean, I've been lied about. I've been doxxed or attempted to be. I've been blackmailed unsuccessfully. I've been straight lied about. I think I said that already. But, I've been treated like someone who's like a Nazi war defendant, and I see this happen all the time, that there's these personal attacks that happen, whether it's someone who just likes a game or makes content about a game, or it's a developer of the game, or a community manager, or whatever. And it's never about the game. Now, there's probably a deep-seated psychological talk to have about how most of these people who are real nasty are just doing this from an anonymous point of view, and they're probably projecting a lot of their own issues, and it maybe has nothing to do with the game anyways, and it's just them working through some stuff. And unfortunately, if you're their target that day, that's what it is. But like me, like, you know, and I've seen it with a lot of people, like, you know, there's people I've had to straight basically block on every form of social media because they just became so obsessed with anything I would say about the game. If I complained about the game, they were nowhere to be found. But if I said something vaguely nice about the game, or had a nice interaction with a dev or someone else who likes the game, you know, it's just full on attack, shill, you know, dick licker, whatever, you know, and it wears on you. I mean, there's multiple times I've considered just deleting my Twitter, deleting the stream, stopping the podcast, and just playing games when I have time, and just not bothering with the community, because sometimes, even if it's a minuscule part of the community that's doing this stuff, it makes it feel almost pointless to interact, to ask questions, to give your point of view. It almost gets to the point where you almost just don't care anymore, and you would rather just disappear and just play the game and just enjoy it without anyone attacking you for it. Now, I'm a little too stubborn to really go through with that, at least at this point. Maybe you all will get rid of me eventually, but it's not going to happen yet. Sorry. Okay, and then for the final part of this, I wanted to do a quick, like, super duper light review of Hellblade. So if you have an Xbox and you have Game Pass, or if you don't, you can probably get it super cheap if you look around for at least a month or 2 or 3. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is on it, and it is super good. It has kind of a slow beginning. It has kind of a God of War feel, and I'm not talking like the old God of Wars. I'm talking like the new one. In the combat, it's more simplified, probably, you know, with weapons and stuff. But it's a fairly simple melee combat game with dodging, you know, doing like blocking and you know, counterattacking and things like that. But beyond what I thought was a fun game to play, the story is just so good. And the first third, I would say, was a little slow. The second third definitely picked up really well. And then the final third of that game may be my favorite thing I've ever played ever. And it's for lots of reasons. I'll try not to spoil anything or much, but it has a lot to do with, in the final third of the game, you spend 2/3 of the game feeling kind of weak and not that powerful, and then you feel very powerful. And the story really picks up, and the storytelling, you know, something that's not spoilery about the game is that they never just come out and say it, but it's pretty obvious that the person you play as has multiple personality disorder, or what now is called dissociative disorder. And it seems like she has PTSD and maybe even is schizophrenic to a point. It seems like she's been through some stuff. And while you're playing the game, she has this multiple personality disorder. So you hear these different voices, and it's you know, the voices will go like ear to ear. You know, so if you're listening, you have to play this game with headphones on if you play it. And what's really cool about it is that when you're exploring, the voices will help you or hurt you. So for the most part, it seems like they help try to guide you in the right direction. If you're walking towards something, an objective, they'll be like, "Oh, she's going the right way. Oh, do you guys see her? What is she doing?" And if you're going the wrong way, they'll be like, "Wait, why is she going that way? It's the wrong way. Stop it! Stop! Stop! Stop!" And when you're fighting, it's really cool. Because it gets to the point where you're fighting multiple enemies at once. And if you're focused on one enemy too long, the other enemies will get behind you and attack you. But if you're paying attention, the voices in your head will say, "Watch out behind you, he's about to hit you." And you can dodge out of the way, or you can counter it, or do whatever you need to do. It's really cool. And then the final third of the game is great. And then the sequence, the final sequence of the game, it's the music, it's the power fantasy, it's the culmination of everything that's happened before. it's just so good. And then the way the game ends is like, is very satisfying, and it makes me I had started this game before the Hellblade 2 trailer dropped, but then that dropped. I was like, I need to finish that game, and then a couple of days I finished it, and I stayed up till like 1 in the morning finishing it. Oh, and it was just so good. So if you can play it, I highly suggest it. What I also highly suggest is sticking around for this 30-second ad roll. I'll be right back. Okay, so we'll wrap this podcast up with some Division community topics, a listener question, some content updates, and we'll kind of wrap this thing up. So some Division community topics. So I was going to quickly kind of talk about my own TU 6.1 impressions, the newest patch for Division 2, and kind of what I've seen. What I've seen is it seems like it's been fairly well received. It did not introduce a bunch of new content. It was pretty starved, if you want me to be totally honest. But it did come with a new event, and it did come with, you know, the new apparel event. It did come with some of the new Christmas stuff, and overall, it's fine. It didn't introduce anything that's all that exciting, to be totally honest. I like it, I guess. The apparel event is really cool, and I really need to get cracking on it because it's the best apparel we've gotten so far. What I will say about the apparel event, between the emotes and the gun skins and just the outfits, this was really obviously supposed to be a Halloween apparel event. So I don't know if it got delayed because they wanted to maybe give us a little bit of something to do on top of hardcore, which was also part of 6.1. But yeah, I mean, this apparel event was super obviously supposed to be for Halloween, but that's fine, whatever, it's still cool. Hardcore is cool. I think I'm only on like level 8 or 9 on my character. I haven't had much time to play Division this week. I like it. I will say, especially at the very beginning, is the most like a Division agent I ever felt playing the game. Now I can already tell I'm starting to feel pretty powerful, and I'm not super worried about dying, even though there's so many times I've died in the regular game because I was like beside like an explosive barrel or something, that I am like super paranoid where I take cover and things like that. But I will say what I like about the most about hardcore is that, especially if you're playing it solo, it's the first time I've really felt like there's consequences if I try to play superhero. So going through the missions, even doing control points and stuff like that, I definitely find myself being very tactical, you know, taking my time. I've actually dedicated to not doing a revive hive run, so I'm not going to use the revive hive right now. I'm using the turret and you know, the heal launcher. I suspect I'm going to regret this eventually, but yeah, it's fun, it's cool. I really hope that they do more to it. I think, you know, I've seen some criticism from people saying it's just the regular game with permadeath. In theory, the first time you die playing the regular game, you could delete your character and it's the same thing, and that's sort of true. If you haven't noticed or if you haven't seen it, there are people who have already finished the raid with their hardcore characters, which is just insane. That's so cool. I suspect these people probably all grouped up and, you know, burned the 30 into, you know, gear score 500 together. And I really think you need to play hardcore solo. I think that's the way that it plays the way it should, with the most risk, and it really kind of brings that feeling. But, you know, obviously you can do whatever you want. Another community topic I saw, which kind of cracked me up, was that there's a Division 1.7 petition asking people, asking Massive to roll back the updates of Division 1 from 1.8.3 to 1.7. This is just such a waste of time. They are not going to do anything to Division 1. I've even seen some people post about like, oh, was this always in Division 1? And people thinking that they're like secretly working on Division 1 still, and they aren't. I would be very willing to bet that there will never be another client side patch for Division 1 that adds anything new. It seems like they are trying to support it pretty well with continuing global events and keeping the servers running well and stuff. But Division 1 is done, and I know it's been really hard for a lot of people to accept that, but Division 1 is over. It's Division 2 now, and there's nothing wrong with playing some Division 1. Go back and live that dream. But people asking, I've literally seen people say they need to end development on Division 2 and go back to 1 and things like that, for various reasons, as just the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Obviously people can have their opinions, and I can think that their opinion is stupid. So and you can think that my opinion on that is wrong, and that's fine. But yeah, so please, for the love of all that's good, don't bother with this stuff. Let's move on. And then the final thing, I made the mistake of posting on Reddit and making a post where I asked, what would your ideal episode 3 of Division 2 be for year 1? And I pointed out some things that we know for a fact about episode 3. We know it's going to be in NYC. I asked people to be somewhat realistic about what that means. We're not getting the whole Manhattan map. Let's just be honest, it's not going to be the entire Manhattan map. In fact, in an interview, I believe Julian Garrity basically said that it's Brooklyn, which I imagine will be a bigger version of the Brooklyn map from Division 1, and it's Coney Island. So in his interview, it was in Japanese, so the way it translates seems like it may not be 100% clear, but it seems like there may be some other neighborhoods as well. So I don't know if we're going to have like a few smaller areas to explore, but we'll have to see. So as I should have predicted, but maybe I was too hopeful, this basically came to almost no worthwhile responses. It's interesting because I'm not burned out on Division 2, but I'm definitely burned out on the community. And that's come from a few years of dealing with it and trying to be kind of the devil's advocate. Even though really I'm rarely trying to be a devil's advocate, I'm often just supporting my own opinions. They just happen to not always jive with the rest of the community. But it's really burned me out, especially lately, when just like 90% of the responses from people are trolling or bitter or toxic. Again, I get why people aren't thrilled with the content we've gotten. I've expressed my displeasure as well. But I just think that there's just so much acting out of line and so much immaturity, and very few people pushing back on it. I don't think it's anyone's job to push back on the toxicity and negativity and stuff. But at the very least, there's a lot of people in the community who I think could step up and at least provide a different perspective, or at least maybe not support the people and promote the people who are being so awful. But that's up to them. I'm tired, after the whole bullshit happened with the podcast and people misconstruing some things I said on it, causing a bunch of issues. I just, it's been hard. Like I said before, I've definitely considered wrapping it all up, and I really don't want to. I really enjoy doing the podcast. I really enjoy streaming when I'm able to. It's just been really hard to find time with the baby and so on. But man, like, there's times where I just miss the days where I would just turn on my Xbox and play games for a couple hours and then go to bed. So I think I'm a little too stubborn to completely go away, at least anytime soon. But it's been tough. What I will give credit to is that there were some people that gave some cool responses. Basically, it came down to people really wanting to hear Rick Velassi on the radio. Maybe even interact with him in some capacity. That would be cool. A lot of people want to fight the cleaners again, which I completely agree. I think we're going to fight cleaners, maybe some scraps of the LMB and Black Tusk in New York City. That's my guess right now. They want to kill Keener, or at least have some type of arc complete with Keener in episode 3. Some type of new replayable mode in the game, which I think is a very reasonable ask, and for episode 3 to involve April, Keller, and Fei Lao. And I don't know about April. I think they may save her for like year 2 in DC type of thing. But Fei Lao, I would find it really hard to believe that we won't at least have some type of cutscene where we see her, and she, gives us orders for what we're doing in New York, or says, hey, we heard that Keener is doing this or that. What would be super cool, and this is way too big of an ask, but if someone's playing Division 2 who played Division 1 and they have a way to recognize that, if they could figure out a way that, like, when you interact with Faye, that your Division 1 character is there or represented in some way, that'd be pretty badass. And if someone didn't play Division 1, maybe it just has a generic agent hanging out. But if there was a way that they could try to incorporate like an updated version of your Division 1 character, that would be pretty badass. And for anyone who left their Division 1 character wearing some like hilariously stupid cosmetics, that'd be kind of funny too. But so there were some decent responses, but for the most part, it was just trash. And it's frustrating. But if you're listening to this, you're probably not one of those people. And I thank you for that. Okay, we had one listener question today from Joe Polidoro on Discord. Joe asked, with a sneak peek to a better RNG system coming after Episode 3, what would you say to an Episode 3 delay so new content and systems are released together? I think that's a reasonable ask. I don't think it's going to happen. Because what I am predicting is that Episode 3 is going to wrap up Year 1, which has been kind of a fluff. I really hope that Episode 3 is a very invigorating change of pace when it comes to the episodes. We'll have to see. And then those changes that we saw, the big change in the gear system I talked about last week, I think is going to come with Episode 1 of Year 2. And I suspect it's going to come with a gear score increase and probably a bunch of huge changes to the game. What I've been trying to point out to people is that if they're changing the way that gear works that much, the way they showed in that preview, I'm imagining that they're going to change the game that much. I don't really know what that means, but it seems like they wouldn't invest that much in that one part of the game, and they aren't going to change a ton of stuff. And it's very possible that the plan all along has been that Year 2 will have these like big immense changes to DC or to the way the game plays or to what's happening in the game world. So I don't blame you for wanting that to be delayed so it all happens at once, but my guess is that when those previewed RNG and gear changes happen, that it will be during a big change, but not Episode 3. So great question though. So thank you for the question. If you have any questions, feel free to ask on my Discord. I give people an opportunity on Twitter to ask questions, on my YouTube, basically anywhere. You can check out Patreon as well. As for content updates, I'm kind of taking a break from streaming right now. I was trying to stick to a schedule. It just wasn't happening. I think I made it 1 week sticking the schedule out of like 2 months. And I'm just really busy. I am taking a couple weeks off around Christmas, so I am going to try to stream a little bit then. I'm trying to implement kind of a workout schedule and a streaming schedule. I've talked to Baby Diesel a lot about it and trying to make sure that I have time for her and for Baby Diesel and to do the things I need to do. I need to lose some weight. I need to get in better shape. I do want to get back to doing the things I enjoy doing when it comes to content creation. And I'm really hoping there's a Division 2, in a state between Episode 3 and Year 2 that makes it easier to come back and make content for it. So we'll have to see. For anyone who still supports and subs my stream and checks out the podcast and watches my videos and tolerates me on Twitter, I very much appreciate it. And that's about all I have. So if you want to support the podcast or my other content, please check out patreon.com/theechocast. If you are listening to this podcast on iTunes, please rate the podcast and leave a review. It helps me get noticed. I am Bon Diesel on Twitch, where I try to stream a couple times a week. I am also at Bon Diesel on Twitter, where you can catch my thoughts, some State of the Game live tweets when we have State of the Game, and the occasional foot in my own mouth. Last, if you want some cool The EchoCast or Bon Diesel merch, please check out bondiesel.live/merch. And that's all I have. So, until next time.